Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Are you ready to do some philosophy? Because we're going to do that for the next 10 minutes. So 3 seconds to run out from this room. The task is to tell you about the next wave of interstate cyber conflicts. Interstate cyber conflicts being the use of ICTs the state might do either directly or indirectly within the context of a conflictual activity. Why is this relevant? Well, you might have come across the expression information societies or mature information societies, realities in which we rely and we expect to rely on digital technologies for so many services ranging from healthcare, education, transport, social interactions, work, and so on and so forth. The more our societies evolve into information societies, the more cyber conflicts become pervasive, the more cyber conflicts becomes effective. This is a snapshot of a dynamic map taken from NORCE website, NORCE being a cybersecurity firm who has sensors all over the world tracking what happens on the internet or the cyberspace. It is interesting not only because it's very colorful, but because it shows more than 4,000 cyber attacks going on within less than a minute. So if you ever read the Bible and you remind the sentence, those who live by the sword die by the sword, well, these days we might have a slightly amended version of it. And so saying that those who live by the digits, well, they die by the digit. And it's important so that we understand cyber conflicts for what they are, a serious source of threats, a serious source for undermining international stability. And we have to understand how we can tackle it. So a few months ago, we published a paper in Science Robotics talking about the challenges that AI will bring to our societies. 5 of those challenges had to do with ethics. I won't go into that. But 2 of those challenges had to do with security, specifically with escalation and lock control. AI becomes much more refined at every interactions. You use it in a context of conflicts. At each interaction, attacks become more pervasive, more effective. At each interaction, they push the boundary a little bit. Well, you might end up in an escalating dynamic. Add to it the fact that we might not have full control on these technologies, and there you go, in a snowball dynamics of which we are not able to understand the origin and understand how we can end it. This is particularly true when we talk about interstate cyber conflicts, where we face a very vicious cycle. Launching cyber attacks, if you are a government or if you are a state, it's much easier than launching kinetic cyber attacks. They cost much less. You have to justify a very easier decision in the eye of the public opinion. You're not sending girls and boys to die somewhere else in the world. And you possibly won't cause any physical damage, any casualties. On top of that, cyberspace is an offensive persistent environment. It's a context in which offense and defense are constantly in touch one to the other. We heard before, if you have a system online, 99% you're going to be hacked. You're going to be attacked. I've lost the screen. You're going to be attacked. Offense is not necessarily successful in cyberspace, but it's much easier to offend than defend. And you might defend and you might gain some tactical win, but you will never be able to have strategic wins while defending. So if you're on the defending side, you're most likely on the losing side. What is the outcome of this approach, of these 2 elements? Well, that all actors involved in cyberspace, especially when we talk about state, is back. Especially when talking about states, well, they try to acquire capabilities, vulnerabilities, 0 days vulnerabilities. We start a dynamic in which we have a cyber arms race, a weaponization of cyberspace. In this context, cyber attacks start to escalate. They become more frequent, intense, more impactful. In 2015, US was experiencing a 1,000 ransomware attack per day. In 2017, the number scaled up to 4,000 attacks per day. This is how cyber attacks are escalating. When we talk about states, dynamics become even more complex. The cycle is much more quicker. And this is because of the way states defend themselves. Now, we're going to do a bit of philosophy. Bear with me for like 30, 40 seconds. The digital, as we heard it before, is not just a technology that allows us to do new things. It's not just a technology that allows us to do different things. It's a transformative technologies. It changes the reality in which we live. It changes our way of understanding the reality in which we live. And security and defense are a very good example of this change. Fortresses were something that would be used both for defense and security. A fortress would keep the people inside secured by fencing off the attacks that were coming from outside. In the digital, this thing that was so going hand in hand starts to be decoupled. And we have security becoming something about engineering the systems so that the system will be resilient, robust, and defense, which become about countering attacks. So we have this gap which is widening. And defense increasingly is less about being passive and more being about being active. And this is actually what we do these days. If we are states and we want to defend our cyber infrastructure, we deploy active cyber defense, which means that we not focus anymore only on building robust, resilient systems, but we also start to develop tactics and strategies to go after our attacker. This is what the US does. This is what Russia is doing increasingly more often. The US has been doing it from the 2012. Israel, and lately NATO. For ages, NATO has been only about being defending and passive. Well, NATO, they're now working on a set of guidelines for member states to deploy active cyber defense, aggressive uses of cyber means. This is the reality where we are. AI will play a crucial role in this context, into making defense much more active, much more effective. This is a picture which was very popular a few years ago. US DARPA ran a cyber grand challenge in which 7 AI systems started fighting each other, playing a war game called Capture the Flag. And this is a representation of the system. So these are 7 autonomous systems playing against each other, doing the following things: identifying their own vulnerabilities and patching them, identifying the vulnerabilities of the other systems and attacking them. At each interactions, the system is much more robust and much more resilient, but also is able to attack to launch much more impactful attack on the other systems. This is no sci-fi. 2019, the US is planning to deploy this to support security of its critical infrastructure. Remember what I said before? Control escalation. Some AI, Russian AI perhaps, attacking some US critical infrastructure, defended by AI. We lose control. Where do we go? So this is the scenario that we're facing, in which escalation and risks for escalations become increasingly more likely, especially when we consider AI-based strategies. How do we get out of this cycle? Well, there are 2 ways. One is deploying deterrent strategies. The other is defining norms to regulate states' behavior into cyberspace. I'm a strong believer into deterrence, but I won't go into that because it's a little bit too technical and requires a bit more time than I have today. But norms are also important. And note, the 2 things go hand in hand. You cannot have deterrence and guarantee stability if you don't have norms. And if you have norms, but you're not able to deter attacks, those won't go much farther. Defining norms for states' behavior in cyberspace has proved very problematic. The UN had a group of experts running from 2004 up to 2017. And while they did constant progress, last year, just the week before they were supposed to hand in their recommendations to the UN General Assembly, the group failed. Failed for political reasons, because states prefer not to have regulations in cyberspace and trying to act in this kind of a gray area that allows them much more room for maneuvering. But this is something that has become much more risky by the day, and we're trying to move past this impasse. In defining norm for states' behavior in cyberspace, we also have to be mindful of previous mistakes and not repeat them. How many of you are familiar with the Tallinn Manual? By raise of hands. Great, only one polluted mind, or 2. So the Tallinn Manual was this NATO-sponsored manual to understand how to regulate states' use of cyber conflict. 2 additions, 2 big mistakes, because the Tallinn Manual was forcing, or is forcing, a new phenomenon, cyber conflicts, conflicts which are not violent, conflicts which are not meant to cause casualties and destructions, into an old phenomenon, physical conflicts, violent conflicts. This approach doesn't work. We need to define new norms. We need to define new ways of regulating state using these new capabilities. And so I started with a paper. I will end up with a paper. I'm an academic, so that's what I take pride of. There are 3 steps that we can do to try to avoid the mistake of the Tallinn Manual, but also break the cycle of escalation. The first one is understanding that as AI improves by working, by interactions, and as there are structures in which alliances are formed and structures, well, we have to do these two things to make sure that there are sparring exercises made mandatory among allies. So to test and stress test AI, understand possible mistakes and shortcomings. Also, we have to make sure that fatal vulnerabilities, which might be harming our critical infrastructures, are disclosed among allies. You remember WannaCry? Well, WannaCry started because the US was keeping a fatal vulnerabilities stored, the NSA, among its archiving and not sharing it with any of its allies. We need to define red lines, criteria for proportionalities. We need to set boundaries for states' behavior. What infrastructure can a state attack? Up to what level? What kind of damage is acceptable? Because this is the only way we can stop escalation to occur. And finally, well, it's time we establish an authority which can control states' use of cyber capabilities in cyberspace and sanctions those states who will violate global norms and push the boundaries to an extreme which is not allowed. So these are not 3 easy steps. Well, no, that's not true. These are 3 very complicated steps. But we need to go through them and make sure that we nail them in the proper way, because the risk is very much high and is increasing every day. And with this, I'll thank you.